Welcome to The Debate. Today we are tackling a fundamental question at the intersection of global commerce and digital engineering.
Yeah, it's a question that pretty much every growing business eventually faces.
Right. When expanding into international markets, is basic automated machine translation, like say running your web pages through Google Translate or slapping a standard AI plugin onto your CMS, is that sufficient for global reach? Or is a deep, culturally adapted localization approach absolutely necessary to actually achieve true digital expansion?
Exactly. And we are grounding our discussion today in the digital marketing and web engineering methodologies of Miguel Ferreira over at mfmd.pt, specifically examining his frameworks for multilingual communication, digital localization, and technical SEO.
Right. And for my part, I will be arguing that in our hyper-accelerated digital economy, basic automated translation tools provide the necessary efficiency and scale for internationalization. I mean, they allow businesses to test and enter markets rapidly without breaking the bank.
And I'll be taking the opposing view. I am going to argue for the comprehensive localization approach outlined in those same frameworks. This methodology, which meticulously adapts context, culture, native dialects, and SEO keywords for international markets, is really the only viable path for actually converting traffic into tangible revenue and long-term brand authority. A literal translation is simply not a localized strategy.
So let's lay out the reality of the modern digital economy. Speed to market and scale are paramount. We are operating in a landscape where companies don't just launch a 5-page brochure site anymore, right? They have to deploy thousands of pages, massive product descriptions, multimedia assets across multiple regions simultaneously. Look at the Moxar project referenced in the methodologies we are discussing today. They manage an e-commerce catalog with over 9,000 products. Now imagine a hypothetical scenario. If a business wants to expand a catalog of that size into 3 new linguistic markets by the end of the quarter, relying on intensive manual human localization for every single string of text creates an insurmountable bottleneck. Basic automated AI tools and machine translation allow businesses to rapidly deploy multilingual content without prohibitive costs or massive delays. I mean, if the primary goal is basic comprehension and ensuring that pages get indexed internationally by search engines, running content through these automated tools is a highly efficient, pragmatic first step. It is the ultimate minimum viable product of internationalization.
See, I come at it from a completely different way. I look at this massive scale of global commerce today. And while I understand the pressure to launch quickly, that minimum viable product approach you are describing might generate raw pages, but it fundamentally fails the business. Simply translating words is entirely insufficient for establishing true digital authority, and in many cases, it actively harms conversion rates. The philosophy we see from Miguel's approach to multimedia and translation is incredibly clear, right? We do not rely solely on basic automated AI tools, and there's a good reason for that. True digital localization requires cultural adaptation, precise semantic meaning, native dialect correction, and tone of voice optimization. For example, Miguel is fluent in English and Portuguese and professional in Spanish. He understands that if you just push a massive catalog through a machine translation API, you strip away the cultural resonance.
You end up with robotic phrasing that fails to connect with the target audience and often misaligns with the company's core branding. In a competitive B2B market, a user's first impression of your translated site dictates their trust in your business. A literal translation is not an MVP. It is a broken product.
I see why you think that. But let me give you a different perspective on how users actually consume content today. We have to look at user experience in the real world, particularly on social media and fast-paced digital platforms. Automated translation tools are incredibly adept at quickly getting base text onto a page or generating rapid subtitles for video content. If a company produces a daily corporate video or fast-moving promotional campaign, automated translation fulfills the fundamental requirement of making that content accessible to foreign speakers instantly. The machine gets the gist across. In a fast-scrolling environment where users are spending, maybe 3 seconds looking at a post, the basic transmission of the idea is often far more critical than the perfect cultural nuance of the phrasing. If I am a mid-sized B2B company, I just want my German or Spanish clients to know what my machine does. I don't really care if the grammar is poetic.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. And let me tell you why, using a very specific metric from the data we are analyzing. Over 80% of video content consumed on social media today is watched on mute. Think about the immense cognitive load that places on the text itself. Without proper text adaptation, not just literal translation, but localized adaptation, the core message is entirely lost in the first few seconds of a video. It isn't about poetry, it is about clarity and retention. The frameworks highlight a hybrid workflow that guarantees perfect timecode synchronization and native dialect correction tailored for exacting corporate standards. Basic AI completely misses the rhythm of how people read and process information in their native tongue. It chops sentences up awkwardly.
If 80% of your audience is relying entirely on those subtitles, a robotic literal translation doesn't just lower the quality of the experience, it fundamentally breaks the communication.
That is an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. The AI tools available today are remarkably sophisticated, and even if the phrasing is imperfect, having the text there at all allows the user to engage with the video. But let's move past social media to the structural backbone of this content: international SEO and search engine indexing. Suggesting that a business must meticulously localize every piece of content ignores how search engines actually crawl the web at scale. Translating keywords literally allows search engines to index those pages in other languages, immediately capturing basic organic traffic. A literal translation of a page, structured with basic H1 and H2 tags, is fundamentally better than having no page at all for a foreign market. It puts the company on the map. It begins the process of domain authority building in that specific region. It gets you in the game.
That assumes search engines still reward basic string matching, which is a really outdated view of SEO, if I'm being honest. The frameworks emphasize a deep focus on topic authority and digital localization. Modern search engines don't just read text strings anymore. They use entity architecture. To put it simply, Google doesn't just read words on a page like a dictionary. It understands concepts like an encyclopedia. It knows that if you are searching for industrial pumps in Spain, there's a specific ecosystem of localized jargon and technical phrasing that should surround that concept. True international SEO involves considering regional browsing preferences and semantic relevance, not just direct word translation. When you use an automated tool to literally translate a keyword, you almost always miss the colloquial term that the local population actually types into the search bar.
But does missing one colloquialism completely tank the page? If the technical specifications are accurate, even if literally translated, the long-tail keywords will still hit.
Yes, it often does tank the page because Google's algorithms heavily favor semantic relevance. Furthermore, the strategies we are looking at note that embedding professionally written, accurate transcripts allows search engines to effectively crawl, read, and index corporate videos and podcasts. Poorly translated text is recognized by these algorithms as low-quality content. It looks like spam. Google penalizes it. Whereas culturally adapted content that maps correctly to regional search intent ranks much higher. You aren't building domain authority with a bad translation. You are actively signaling to the algorithm that your site provides a low-effort, low-value user experience.
Well, I am not convinced by that line of reasoning, because you are treating the Google algorithm as an infallible arbiter of human culture, rather than a mathematical model assessing user behavior. If a page provides the utility the user is seeking, say an industrial machinery specification, the user will stay on the page regardless of whether the translation uses the absolute perfect local phrasing. The data from the mfmd.pt portfolio indicates a deep integration between ERP systems and web platforms, managing thousands of products. If you use automated translation, you get those thousands of products indexed immediately. Yes, the algorithm favors semantic relevance, but modern large language models are increasingly capable of mapping literal translations to the correct semantic entities. You don't always need an expensive human intervention to achieve topic authority when the AI is processing billions of parameters of linguistic data.
That is a compelling argument, but have you considered the explicit warning regarding the convergence of data engineering and human emotion? The methodology clearly states, it is not enough to be findable. Your business must be understandable by machines to be relevant to humans. When we talk about digital localization, the text highlights the absolute necessity of adapting content for specific markets while considering linguistic nuances.
A machine might translate an industrial specification accurately in a strict literal sense, but it often fails to localize the measurement units, the regional safety compliance terminology, or the industry-specific jargon that builds immediate trust with an expert buyer. You are equating visibility with authority, but in B2B digital marketing, authority is built through meticulous technical alignment with the user's specific cultural context.
If your German client sees a localized safety specification that uses the wrong metric units because an AI hallucinated it, they are not going to buy a $100,000 piece of equipment from you.
You bring up a good point about the user feeling respected and trusting the data, which actually bridges perfectly into something else we need to address: accessibility. Because if a clunky translation alienates a standard user, we have to look at how we are serving users with disabilities globally. I question whether the heavy investment in deep localization is strictly necessary for all businesses when we consider technical compliance. Standard automated translation might meet the basic threshold for most small to medium enterprises. If an automated tool generates basic closed captions and translates alt text for images, hasn't the business met a reasonable standard of digital accessibility? They have made the site functional for foreign users and those using screen readers without the massive overhead of professional linguistic review. Surely something is better than nothing here.
I must strongly disagree there. Web accessibility is framed in Miguel's frameworks as both a technical and an ethical pillar. The methodology strictly adheres to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG, aiming for compliance with levels A, AA, or even AAA. Proper localization, including highly accurate closed captions, ensures a website remains 100% inclusive for individuals with hearing or visual impairments. Basic automated tools cannot structurally guarantee this compliance. They frequently hallucinate words or misinterpret context. Imagine a screen reader dictating an automatically translated alt text that completely misidentifies an image's function on a checkout page. It creates an experience that is confusing or entirely misleading for someone who relies on it.
But the technology is rapidly improving. We can't judge today's AI by the standards of 5 years ago.
Even with improvements, the source advocates for the use of specialized CAT tools or computer-assisted translation tools, specifically to ensure terminological consistency across high-volume projects. And let's clarify what a CAT tool is, because it is fundamentally different from just dumping text into ChatGPT. A CAT tool utilizes translation memory, a database that stores previously translated and human-approved segments of text. It is like a highly trained assistant that remembers every specific company term you have ever approved. Basic AI just guesses every time. Using CAD tools requires human-led linguistic review to verify that the memory banks are perfectly aligned with the brand. You cannot claim a site is accessible if the translated accessibility features like alt text or captions are gibberish to the native speaker relying on them.
I see why you think that. But let me give you a different perspective on the reality of implementing those tech standards. The strategies we are discussing actually offer generative AI chatbots and automated support systems as a way to multiply a commercial team without increasing salaries. It acknowledges that automation is a powerful tool for efficiency. If we accept that AI can handle complex customer support queries by drawing on a proprietary knowledge base, it is logically consistent to trust that same AI architecture to translate and generate alt text or captions at a level that serves the vast majority of users. Is it flawless? No. But does it provide immediate, scalable accessibility to global markets? Yes.
I come at it from a different way, because you are conflating a highly trained, proprietary generative AI chatbot with basic automated translation. The material specifies that these chatbots are exhaustively trained with your proprietary documentation. They are highly localized to the company's specific curated data. Basic machine translation of a website is a generalized application pulling from the wider internet. Furthermore, the material on accessibility specifically calls for adapting your website to comply with local and international digital accessibility laws. Legal compliance in sectors like education, healthcare, or heavy industry simply does not tolerate the margin of error that comes with basic automated translation. You need the human layer, what the framework calls linguistic review, to verify grammar, clarity, and coherence.
Let's pivot slightly to the broader economic reality of this, specifically brand authority and return on investment. I will acknowledge the thoroughness of the localization approach you are defending. It is undoubtedly the gold standard. However, I would argue that in today's fast-paced digital ecosystem, users are increasingly forgiving of slight translation errors if the underlying product or service is highly valuable. Let's look at the I Know of Am project mentioned in the portfolio. If I am looking to purchase specialized additive manufacturing software, I care far more about the technical capabilities of that software than whether the Portuguese to English translation uses perfect syntax on the landing page. An automated translation serves as an acceptable minimum viable product that gets the user to the checkout funnel. The utility of the product supersedes the aesthetic perfection of the translation.
That is a compelling argument. But have you considered the underlying philosophy of the Web 5.0 era outlined in these frameworks? The material states explicitly, protecting the client's data and experience is the purest form of loyalty in the new digital economy. Literal translations can sound robotic, disjointed, or even culturally insensitive, which instantly damages credibility. When you are selling high-value industrial machinery or advanced cybersecurity services, trust is your primary currency. If a potential client reads a product page and the language feels cheap or neglected, they will consciously or subconsciously assume the product itself lacks attention to detail.
I hear that, but aren't we ignoring the cost factor of validating a new market?
It is not just about cost. It is about friction. The methodologies note that latency is the enemy of conversion, and we need to expand on that concept. Think about it this way. We obsess over site speed because a 1-second delay in a page loading kills conversions. But what about cognitive latency? If a user has to mentally pause for even 2 seconds to decipher a clunky, robotic translation of your technical specifications, they are gone. Bad translation is the new slow server. The frameworks detail how linguistic review optimizes the tone of voice to align communication precisely with the company's branding. This level of localization provides a massive competitive edge over companies with neglected, poorly translated digital profiles.
I am not convinced by that line of reasoning because it ignores the strategic engineering of digital expansion. The strategies emphasize return on investment and operational efficiency. If a company spends tens of thousands of dollars manually localizing content for a market that hasn't even been validated yet, that is poor strategic engineering. Automated translation allows a company to gather data. You use the analytics tools, Google Analytics, Search Console, to see if there is actual demand in that foreign market. If the traffic converts, even at a lower rate due to imperfect translation, you then have the data-driven justification to invest in the deep localization you're advocating for. Automated translation is the scouting party. Localization is the permanent settlement.
I understand the economic appeal of that strategy, but the critical flaw lies in the assumption that you can accurately validate a market with a broken tool. If your scouting party presents a robotic, poorly translated version of your brand, the data you gather will be fundamentally skewed. The low conversion rate won't tell you that there is no demand in that market. It will only tell you that users rejected your poor user experience. You are testing the waters by dumping toxic waste in them. You cannot test market viability if you do not respect the local consumer enough to speak their language accurately. The methodology advocates for building a digital ecosystem right from the foundation, ensuring that the interface respects the user.
That is an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently. The friction of cognitive latency is real, and skewed data is a risk, but we must balance it against the friction of not existing in the market at all. By utilizing automated tools, you completely remove the barrier to entry. And as the frameworks demonstrate, we can integrate advanced technologies into these workflows. It doesn't have to be a binary choice between pure machine translation and incredibly slow traditional human translation. The technology itself is bridging the gap, making the automated baseline much closer to your standard of localization than it was even 2 years ago.
The technology is absolutely part of the solution, which is exactly why the source advocates for a hybrid approach. But the technology must be guided by human intent. The material specifies that we should leverage advanced CAT tools to ensure terminological consistency and efficiency, but it pairs this directly with professional linguistic review and cultural adaptation.
The machine provides the efficiency and the scale, the human provides the empathy, the cultural context, and the brand alignment. Without that final human layer, without ensuring the localized terminology matches what a native professional expects, internationalization fails to convert raw traffic into the long-term trust that sustains a brand.
It is time to summarize our positions. Throughout this debate, I have argued for the pragmatic value of basic automated translation as an essential foundational tool for global reach. In a digital economy defined by speed, scale, and the need for rapid deployment, leveraging AI and machine translation allows businesses to bypass the massive bottlenecks of manual localization. It is a cost-efficient strategy that ensures content is quickly indexed by search engines, making a brand's products and services visible to international markets. While it may lack perfect cultural nuance, it provides the essential utility needed to test new regions, capture organic traffic, and establish a global footprint quickly.
And I have maintained that without deep, culturally adapted localization, true global digital expansion is an illusion. Drawing on Miguel Ferreira's methodologies, I have argued that simply translating words literally fails to capture the cultural context and search intent required for true topic authority. An over-reliance on basic AI compromises technical accessibility standards, frustrates users with cognitive latency, and degrades the experience, particularly in multimedia environments where content is consumed without sound. Protecting the client's experience through precise semantic adaptation and tone of voice optimization is the only way to convert traffic into lasting brand trust and measurable B2B revenue.
We certainly have points of convergence here. We both agree that reaching an international audience is absolutely essential for digital growth in today's interconnected market. We also share the view that technology, whether it is sophisticated large language models, CAT tools, or generative AI, inevitably plays a foundational role in modern workflows, making cross-border communication more efficient than ever before.
Indeed. Where we continue to fundamentally disagree is on whether basic, automated translation serves as an acceptable, functional baseline for market entry or whether it acts as an active detriment to brand authority that skews validation data and alienates potential customers from the very first click.
The complexity of global digital expansion just can't be overstated. And finding the right balance between speed to market and localized precision is a challenge every growing business must navigate.
We encourage our listeners to explore the methodologies on digital internationalization at mfmd.pt. Examine the frameworks for yourselves to form your own conclusions on the right balance of automation and localization for your specific business needs.
Thank you for joining us for this intellectual exchange. Until next time.